Welcome to the University of San Francisco and Silk Series event, Dare to Discover, endeavor of internationally rooted CEOs, and that would be Alfred Chuang and Vishal Sikka. I'm Moira Gunn, and some of you may recognize me as the host of Tech Nation and Biotech Nation on NPR, and that means you would know the opening to the show. From San Francisco, I'm Moira Gunn, and this is Tech Nation. But what you may not know is this show actually started here at USF. So the opening could be from the University of San Francisco. I'm Moira Gunn, and this is Tech Nation. And in fact, while we're broadcast all over the world, I've come back here. I'm now a professor, and I started here as a computer science major. I went on to get a master's in computer science, a PhD in mechanical engineering, and now I'm a professor of bioentrepreneurship. So of course, like all things USF, it encompasses many things. It's the whole biotech area, which we're all talking about now, and that goes from all the disciplines from the lab bench all the way to a registered product, a vaccine, a treatment, a diagnostic. And we do it all, from science to information systems and data science to law and finance and bioethics. We're very steeped in bioethics. In fact, one of our former presidents started the first bioethics program in a hospital at UCSF. So this is a very wide-ranging conversation and a wide-ranging university. And I've been thrilled to be asked to moderate this conversation. So let me first introduce Alfred Chuang. After an early career with Sun Microsystems, he founded BEA Systems, where he was a CEO, and today he's the general partner at Race Capital. Let me also introduce Vishal Sikka. In a long career with SAP, he eventually became its CEO, and then on to being CEO of Infosys. And today he's the founder and CEO of Vinay Systems, a Silicon Valley software startup in AI and machine learning. And among other board positions, Vishal sits on the board of Oracle, which very generously purchased Alfred's company, BEA Systems, several years ago. So you guys are absolutely, tied, even if you weren't participating in that transaction. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Let's start with tech credentials, academic tech credentials, because you can't really, how would I say this? You can't really get in and do tech unless you have skills in it, unless you have education in it. Alfred, bachelor's here at University of San Francisco in computer science, and like me, you went elsewhere for a master's in computer science, in your case, UC Davis. Vishal, your undergraduate was at Syracuse University in computer engineering. And then you went on to Stanford for your PhD in computer science. We're having a computer science festival here. And actually, I wanted to sort of start right in the middle of it. At what point in your life did you realize you loved computers and you liked building things? Alfred, let's start with you.
Well, actually, I got my very first hand on the computer when I was in high school. So it was actually at Milburn. And back then, all you program was in assembly language. And it's something I think you look back was actually pretty esoteric. It wasn't esoteric for me at the time. And then when I got to USF, really my original interest was to study chemistry and biology, because my parents are very old traditional Asian parents that they wanted, my sister's a lawyer, my younger brother is an architect, my dad's an accountant. So it's only natural that I would study something that in that line of profession. But I really had no interest in that. So I ran into a very, very good professor at USF, Michael Cudley. And I know he was a dear friend of yours. And then I think that changed my life. I mean, I fell in love with logical problem solving. And I think that's a lot of computer science. That's really what that's about.
How about you, Vishal?
Well, same as Alfred. In high school, there was a Commodore. I believe it was a Commodore 64, but I'm not 100% sure anymore. But it was a Commodore, and there was you could write in BASIC, and I wrote a song. I wrote a program to play a song, and shortly after that, there was actually an IBM 360, which Alfred, you might remember. The IBM 360 was donated to the school in India that I was studying at by the United Nations, and I programmed in Fortran in punch cards on IBM 360.
I actually have a USF Fortran manual for you from those days. So we'll have to get together, bring all our technology together. Now you can only build so much by yourself. There's always the idea that there's a sort of a geeky person in the room. They can't talk to anybody. If you want to build anything that is of any size, you've got to manage a group of people, a diverse group of people to do it. So I have a two-part question. When did you figure out you could manage a group of programmers, engineers, technicians? And when did you figure out you liked it? Either one of you.
Well, I'll start. So it was complete serendipity. I had an opportunity just because the people that worked in graduate studies at UC Davis, I started as a PhD student, that they went to work for the startup called Sun Microsystems, which was at the time was a privately held company, fairly small, 300 people. And then they all said, wow, they pay a lot, right? So $3,000 a month. So I said, I can't pass that up. So I'm going to go spend a few months, make some money, and maybe can buy a few things I've always wanted. I'm a very geeky guy. I'm interested in all kinds of things electronics. So I ended up staying there for almost 9 years, and I had a very, very good time. And at Sun, it was kind of interesting. When I first got on, I was an engineer, and I watched what my boss did, who was a manager. He was a first-time manager, and I just said, wow, there is a difference. The difference, especially when you have a very, very fast-growing technology company, is either you're telling someone else what to do or you're being told what to do. So I said, it's much better to be telling someone else what to do than to do what someone else tell me what to do. So I said, how do I get there? And it just so happened, I think Sun was really, the modern day Sun would have been Google. So it was kind of like a crazy, Scott McNeely hates it when I say it, it's a random drive-by shooting innovation kind of company. And it produced a lot of very smart people in this company. And all you have to do is, if you are very convinced of what you're doing is right, automatically they just let you lead it. And no one will stop you. I mean, this is really the culture that I think now is very pervasive in Silicon Valley, which is, if you really onto the right thing, no one will stop you. So that's very different from the old business where top-down management was very critical. It's just not how it works in technology because we needed things so quickly. So with that, I kind of stumble into the need to lead, which then you need other people to work with. And I got into it.
That's great. How about you, Vishal?
In my case, Moira, I learned the power of working together with a team, that it takes more than one person at Stanford. We participated in a project, a very kind of a visionary project across the country. It was sponsored by DARPA, where a bunch of universities and national labs worked together on a collaborative engineering project, where the idea was to demonstrate how, this was in days just before the web, that a diverse group of people across physical distances could work together and build something. And we demonstrated how you can build a small computer from design until manufacturing across, with a team that was distributed across the world, across the country. And that to me was, we had a small team at Stanford that was a part of that. And then there were 5 other teams. And that was a pretty visceral reminder, a lesson of how it takes more than a single person, but you take teams and teams of teams coming together. So this idea of diverse teams, both teams themselves being diverse, as well as teams in diverse places working together, really hit home, and it has been with me since that time.
Well, you really hit the nail on the head, is that if you've got to get it done, and you're the team leader or the project manager or the division manager, you don't care where you get these resources. The whole idea, you're going to say, I'm sorry, we actually, when I was at NASA, there was one department that had all white guys with brown beards. And we used to laugh at them, saying, how could they keep hiring more people? They all look the same. It's not funny. Now we know why they didn't get a lot done, but it's like, you put everyone together. You need everyone to solve a problem.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the one of my teachers, Alan Kay, always talks about this idea that ideas are made of light. That we tend to think of things as being solid, but they are really synthesis of different things. And so when you have a diverse team, this is a team that is diverse. The synthesis of the different ideas from a diverse team are always much richer than from a homogeneous team. And this is it leads to better products, it leads to better ideas, it leads to faster things, execution. In every way, a diverse team is better than a team that is not diverse. And it is not just about the social arguments, but in reality, it is in fact a much better idea to have a team that is diverse in every way.
Well, people don't always just build technology for the sake of technology. It doesn't happen a lot. It actually grows out of innovative thinking, entrepreneurial thinking, thoughts, ideas, and then we're implementing it. Much of what we were talking about is the implementation phase, some of which takes a lot of innovation, but innovation comes from many places and in many circumstances. Alfred, when you and I spoke, you mentioned all the innovations that came out of the 2008 global financial crisis. Let's talk about that.
Well, actually, so I'm now a full-time venture capitalist now, and I spend a lot of time looking at new young companies, especially in a very early stage of their formation. And I've seen over 200 companies since March. So it's Zoom is actually a wonderful tool. It's going back to Vishal's point. One is it's so critical to have a global perspective and diverse views on things, because that's generally allow more more rapid innovations to happen. But having now culturally that we must adapt to a very decentralized workforce allow us to have that even more rapid, because having a company that was somewhat centralized, they have a headquarters, you have to think that it's in a place and then the rest of the people are remote. Now we don't think like that anymore. By and large, most of the company now believe that we're all remote. So since we're all remote, so culture and process are now implemented this way. But going back to the point that we talked about, it's actually very distinctive, because I have invested in a lot of little companies. I just love new technology. And I remember there were times like post April 2000, after the dot-com bubble busted, and then in May of 2008, after the financial crisis had happened, miraculously, we've seen some dramatic change in innovation. I think anytime that there's any kind of crisis, it's people take a deep breath, they sit down, they think, which is very crucial for innovators, that they, instead of thinking about the problem they're dealing with, is to think, look out in a very long period of time and say, what does the world need? So 2008 bought Marvel, right? So think about this. So the following list of technology didn't exist before the 2008 financial crisis. Cloud really didn't exist. It only happened in the past decade or so. SaaS really didn't exist in 2008. Social network didn't exist. The Facebook and the like didn't exist. Then the list goes on. So the touch phone didn't exist, let alone the app economy didn't exist. Gen Z and this whole gig economy didn't exist. These are all the things that, can you imagine we live life now without that stuff, without the communication, without Instacart, without Uber Eats, without people. I mean, it's you can't even fathom how we can survive without these things. But those all came, I think a lot has to do with having a chance for people to take a deep breath and innovate from there. So I'm quite convinced that after this crisis, which there are many things that obviously we're faced with, right? Teleeducation, as we are witnessing, sitting right here. Telemedicine, now we've gotten a second waiver on HIPAA that we could see our doctor basically, and then on Zoom and send an email to our doctor, and now it's all legit and we can do all that. This whole remote workforce and the shift in real estate, hospitality, transportation, it's going to be so profound. I think this crisis will drive many more times of innovation in the next decade that we're going to look back, than what we've seen in the last two crises combined. So I think this is going to be a super big one. So all of us who are trying to innovate, do a startup, studying engineering, I just can't think of there's a possible better time in history, right? This is it. So it's a very exciting time.
Well, I have to say, as you were saying, teleeducation, I wouldn't want to have to do the COVID-19 pandemic without all this technology. And I have to tell you, we're remote, which doesn't mean we just throw things online. We're really connecting. We're seeing our students connect in ways that they were never able to connect before. We're rethinking our classes. And I have to tell you, the teachers are better teachers now. And when we go back to being in the classroom, we're taking some of that with us. In a sense, that's our taking a breath to rethink what was going on. And we all are doing it. It's phenomenal. Vishal, what are some of the things that, besides Zoom and Zoom-like products, what are the kinds of things you're seeing that you think are going to come out, innovation coming out of this pandemic?
I think you mentioned earlier at the beginning, you mentioned biotech. I think deeply examining biology and the role of technology in biology and vice versa is something that is extremely, I think that's a big area. If you look at the time today, the new iPhone that is coming out later this year is going to have chips that are built on the 5 nanometer process. They're going to have the 5 nanometer technology, which means that we now have the ability to build machines that are that fine that we can etch 5 nanometer wide silicon, layers. And the virus, the coronavirus that we are dealing with, is 120 nanometers in size, which means it is 24 times bigger than the 5 nanometer chip that we are building. So it's like a human being looking at a 20-story building. It's that much bigger compared to the 5 nanometer process that we know. So we should be able to know where this virus is, deal with it. And yet we have been struggling with it. The vaccine is still not out, even though when it does come out, it will be the fastest that we have ever built a vaccine. So I think there's going to be a dramatic explosion in sort of this intersection of biology and digital technology. Similarly, in other forms, like Alfred mentioned, the way we communicate, the way we do everything at a distance, learning, as USF has, USF was incredibly fast at moving to distance learning. All other activities, the different walks of life and how those are being done now at a distance. I was reading about Singapore Airlines, which, both Alfred and I used to travel a lot on, are now offering tours of, going through a dining experience inside the plane that is sitting on the tarmac, just so people can remember what it was like to fly again. There is all this kind of distance X, if you will, being in the out of place experiences. Also, I think that energy, one of my friends is about to start tomorrow as the new CEO at Siemens. And he asked me to make a video for him last week and come up with some ideas for what Siemens should do in the future. And, early on in this pandemic, there was such a shortage of all kinds of things, PPE for doctors and masks. And there were doctors and nurses wearing rain ponchos as personal protective gear. This should not be happening, not in the US, not in the 21st century. We should be able to print these things, in our offices, in our towns, in our homes. Why don't we have these printers that can print the stuff that we need? And it's not so far-fetched to think that. So I think that this kind of technology will go through a lot. As we are sitting here, there is there are some fires burning, very nasty ones in Napa and Sonoma valleys.
Yes.
This is a stark reminder that climate change is here already. It is not something to be debated to something out there in the distance. So I think a rapid reduction in energy consumption for whatever we do. I think all of these are, like Alfred said, there is a opportunity to rethink basically every walk of life and how we go about it in light of this pandemic.
I was going to say, here at the university, we're not just taking everything we have, putting it online, putting it remotely and saying, oh, we're doing it better. We have to respond. For instance, in the biotech area, I've always taken students to bioclusters all over the world. We're not going there. We were supposed to go to Ireland and Northern Ireland in May. That didn't happen. So what were we going to do? So quickly we said, well, how about a course in the spring in biotext response to the COVID-19 pandemic? Everybody said, that's great. They said, what book are you going to use? I said, that's a good one. That's a really good one. But the point is, between now and then, so much has happened, changed attitudes. What's the ethics of how do we bring these vaccines to people? What should we do? How do we act as a globe, as a nation, as a locality? There are so many issues. This is time to really sit down and think about it. And many of the areas, all of the areas, I would bet, they've got to rethink what's important to us today at a university and how do we do it. But I don't want to miss you, Alfred. What do you see coming as a result of this pandemic?
Well, obviously, I have a young son. He's 19. This is his second year in college, and I'm seeing that he can't go back to school. You know, he said his independence only lasted for one semester. And then he ended up getting sent home before spring break and haven't been able to return since. So then he is at Lafayette, which is this very small liberal arts college. And it's a immersive kind of like on-campus kind of experience. So he got sent home, but you know, I'm very proud of him that he was able to kind of adjust himself very well. I mean, most of his classes are super early because of the East Coast school. This is very profound. I think this is a test of humanities, of what we're made of. And how we can take care of each other, which is very crucial. I wish that we were smarter in how we dealt with this pandemic from the get-go. Wish I wore masks. That was confusing back in March. And now people know, and everywhere that at least I rarely ever go out, but when I go out, I see people, they are wearing masks. They understand that how they can be smart to avoid getting infected, keeping distance. If somebody's coughing, you know, step back. So people, I think, are in many ways getting smarter. Our world's not gonna be the same. I mean, I'm quite convinced that it's very unlikely, just based on the history of crisis. We never really would step right back to the place that we came from. I know that is the wish, but you know, and people will say, well, that's so sad. But actually, generally, it doesn't become sad. I think we're gonna be walking straight into a place that's better. We would likely go back to work, but that work, the definition of work congregated in a place will happen very differently, right? So, I mean, Google is starting to let people go back to the office, but they won't go into meetings. So it'd be like, we admit some students that are actually in our dormitory, but they don't go to class, right? They're doing education remotely in the dorm room to keep each other safe. I'm very excited about many things that I think we've been wanting for a long time is really gonna happen. Reducing our carbon footprint. The happening of autonomous vehicle would be for the first time, I think, we finally have a chance to test properly because there are very few cars on the road. Two is we now can decide that how public transportation will be working in the future. I can totally see share a ride that they can self-clean themselves. We get in, we get us to the place, there's no driver inside. These, by the way, the way to do this is quite simple, is to be able to have square blocks of radius of metropolitan city that are only for autonomous vehicle. So they deal with pedestrian generally much better than a human driver. But human drivers are not good for autonomous car, right? So if all the autonomous cars are communicating and they are sharing the road only with them, that will happen. I think I can totally see that finally we have a chance to implement a technology we've been working on and have such high hope for such a long time. So same thing, I think, in biology. So now it's the first time that we have to readjust how medicine will be delivered to people, right? How do we get people back to do, you know, elective surgeries? How do we distribute this vaccine? Who should get the vaccine first? I mean, that really is a mix of now our priority, humanity, right? What's, you know, social justice, and then how do we actually do it correctly, right? And how soon can we do this? And how effective would a vaccine be? I mean, all that stuff is a test, I think, of what we're made of. So I think this is going to be a very exciting time. Some bad things may happen, but a lot of good things for sure will be happening.
It really is fascinating because we're talking about the nature of technology. I know I was standing actually between two buildings, which are still there at USF today when I first started the show, and someone was very irritated with me. What do you mean tech? You mean computers? What do you mean? And I said, no, if God didn't make it, it's technology. And he was like, what? And that's true. All of this is technology. Even thinking that these streets, if we start to put the autonomous vehicles here, these are all things that, because we have a human intention and all of everything we have to think about. Now, I really want to get to your immigrant stories, because both of you came from another place. Alfred, you from China. Vishal, you came from India. Let's start with you, Alfred. Tell us when you came and what was the circumstance that brought you to the United States?
My circumstances was usual and unusual. I have always aspired to study here in this country. I mean, like most of the immigrants that come to this place, that's where they started. And I was supposed to be going to a Jesuit high school called Bellarmine, in my first year. Unfortunately, my student visa was declined. So I ended up in a high school in Canada, and then through a very interesting set of circumstances that on my way from Ontario back to Hong Kong, which is where my parents live, we got stuck here because they grounded all the DC-10s back in those days. And then ended up that transpired into just literally doing on the fly application at University of San Francisco. This is such a beautiful place. How could you go anywhere else? And then I get accepted. I get pointed in the right direction by the admission office to go see a guy. His name was Bob. I remember Bob in the U.S. consulate office or whatever the office it was in Calgary, and handed him a box of chocolate. The guy was super nice, and then boom, stamped the visa, and then I ended up here. And by the way, the reason why my visa originally got rejected was, I thought the immigration officer back in the Hong Kong U.S. consulate asked me a trick question and said, well, if you're ever going to go to high school in the U.S., you're going to stay for college? I said, of course. And if you stay for college, will you stay for graduate school? I said, of course. And then if you get an opportunity to kind of like practice your work in the U.S., will you stay? I said, yes. And they said, that's it. You're never going to go. So, and I lied, right? And I did everything that I said I wasn't going to do. I stayed. And this is I owed everything to this education process, and a lot to most of it to this country and what it's made of, and allow people like me to come to study, to get educated, to practice my art. And I ended up to work, in a very good company, learn a lot from them, started my own, and were able to employ a lot of people, and and all that stuff. And it was a magical experience, and it's just something that we have to treasure so much. I know that things are changing, and there are things that our current administration have a different view of it, and I think that would be a terrible mistake. If we stop this motion. I mean, seriously, Vishal's here, right? He came here to study. The CEO of Microsoft, the CEO of Adobe, right? The CEO of Google, are all from a foreign country, all from India. So let's not kid ourselves what we're made of, right? I mean, what greatness we have brought. So it's critical to keep, to think about things like that.
Be careful what you write on your applications. Be careful in the interview. But you did your last year of high school at Bellarmine.
Yeah.
Right. So you were a Bell then. And fine Jesuit high school in San Jose. And Vishal, you went to a Jesuit high school in India.
That's right. Both my wife and I went to Jesuit high schools. I went to Rosary High School in a town called Baroda in the western part of India. And then I did my undergraduate studies in upstate New York, in Syracuse University, as you mentioned. I came here with, literally $0 in my pocket. We hear about the proverbial $20 or $200. I had nothing. I don't know, Alfred, if I told you this. I had a bag of peanuts in my suitcases. There was this roasted peanuts that were special in the part of India where I grew up. And at customs, the officer asked me, do you have some food? And he was looking through my suitcases and he saw the peanuts and he started laughing. And he said, next time an officer asks you if you have any food, you tell them, officer, I've got peanuts. And I did not understand the joke until I went outside and I talked to my brother and my uncle about it, and they explained to me what it meant. So that's how I came into this country. And purely out of economic necessity, did something crazy in my undergraduate time. I did 2 years worth of studies in 1 year, a little bit more than two. I did 62 credits in 1 year. You were supposed to do 30 as a full-time student. And so when I applied for grad school, people used to look at my transcripts, and first they used to think that there was something wrong, and then they realized what this maniac had done. And I got admitted to every grad school I applied to because of that. And that's how I ended up at Stanford.
That's right. They said, this guy's got to be brilliant and a hard worker. So it was a really smart thing you did, Vishal.
Yeah, and it was out of the immigrant grit, that we only had money for. Syracuse was an expensive place, and we could afford 2 semesters of tuition. So we were like, okay, how much can we do in 2 semesters?
It's a familiar tune. I did my master's in 3 semesters under the same proposition. It's like, how fast can I do this? So it was this is a good idea. This is another good idea for people to do. No, don't screw around. Just go and do your work.
Exactly.
Now that we've established we all have Jesuit educations, and anyone who has one is very familiar with what we call Ignatian values.
Yes.
That's like contemplative action, which would be like ongoing systematic gathering of facts, contemplation, and then action. And at the same time, sometimes we have agility that says it's time for this, we have to do that. So you can be without bias, caring for the whole person. This brings me to talk about action in our lives. Both of you, through big companies, big decisions, hard decisions. I'd like to know, in all of this, you don't have to give us the details, sometimes that reveals too much, but what made the hard decisions hard as you were coming up through the ranks in these careers? Alfred, let me start with you. What made the hard decisions hard?
I think obviously always the most difficult decisions I think in life is always around people. It's really never around things or business or even innovation in this case. It's always around people. Because our motion is the forward moving motion, right? As humanity, right? So as human. Therefore, things will get displaced and new things will come. And things will change around us that will force us to make decisions. So, almost all of us has gone through the process that you may have to let an employee go. It's a heart-wrenching process. It really is a very difficult thing to do. It could be because of circumstances, not because of the person. And it's things that are very difficult not to take it so personally. I think similarly, at times where you're reorganizing, you're hiring very rapidly, you're making changes, and at times policy will change. Those kind of things that you're affecting, people's life. So to me, those kind of decisions generally are absolutely the most difficult. And the problem is you don't learn that really in the classroom, which I think will go back to your earlier point. So why people go to a Jesuit institution to kind of get educated? It's because of the subtleties of the values and the things that in the fabric that you don't really taking it directly from a class, but it's in between. It's an interaction, is the way that they do things. It's the culture that they instill into a college that you learn from, that hopefully when you walk out the place, you said, okay, these decisions are terribly difficult, but yet I'm doing it ethically, right? That's a very big word, right? To do things very ethically, because that's really at the end, beyond the law is what you ultimately are standing on. When you go to sleep at night and you're taking the last breath, you look to yourself in the mirror and say, well, did I do the right things, right? And doing the right things is more important than anything at some point in someone's life. So that is the subtlety of why you want to get educated and why you will live with you forever. You think about this stuff whatever decision you're making, especially around people, right? You say, am I doing the best I could? And it's an ethical thing that I'm doing. Am I doing right for the person, also for the business I'm in? Then I think you can walk out and say, I can live for myself with the decision, which I think is critical.
Absolutely. What about you, Vishal? What made
Uh,
the hard decisions hard?
Now, Alfred spoke so with so much wisdom and eloquently about this. I think people, as he said, people decisions are the hardest ones. I would add one more thing: letting go of something that we have been successful at, because there is a change coming. And so, change, like Alfred said, is a constant. We get disrupted all the time because new things happen. And so, for large, successful organizations to let go of what they have been good at in order to embrace a new thing is incredibly hard. It is very, very hard. That's why you see so few examples of companies, large companies, that are able to embrace new things and disrupt themselves in order to do that. I went through two of those experiences. It is incredibly hard. There is there are some monkeys in certain parts of the world. You can see these videos on YouTube where the way to catch them is you put a nut there inside a tree and they grab hold of the nut and then they don't let go. Even though all they have to do is to release the nut and then they are free again, but they don't let go. And we are all in some sense like that. We find it difficult to let go of what we have been successful at. And I think that is a incredibly hard thing to do. By the way, one of my friends, Ben Horowitz, has written this beautiful book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which covers exactly this point. But like Alfred said, you have to have the courage to make those tough choices. And those transformational moments show up in enterprises, in companies, in organizations, but they also show up in our own personal lives when we have to make the difficult decision to embrace something new and to let go of something that we have been successful at and that we have been good at, because it is time. And I think the Jesuit education in particular around that idea of embracing change, the time for action, helps a lot in thinking through those moments.
Actually, Vishal, I want to add to one thing. I agree wholeheartedly. Actually, one of the very magical things, especially when you distill down in the computer sciences field, especially when you get down to software, it's by default. In our lifetime, in our career, we're going to be seeing the technology that we invented come,
Yes.
and then they will get displayed sometime by us. Right?
Yes.
I've done it 3 times to my own, cannibalizing my own technological invention, and then new one comes again.
Yes.
And because the cycle is so short now, we're going to see so many come and go. So if you are too hung up with the past, you can never embrace the future.
Yes.
And if you can embrace the future and you can look back and almost laugh at it and say, well, it's just so great in life that I can see my legacy come and go several times. People rarely get one shot to create one legacy. In the engineering field, and now obviously broadly in the technology field, which everybody is kind of in now, we have the chance to go do that multiple times. That means each time the sprint is shorter and we have a chance to make the world better each time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a wonderful thing to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. Very well said.
It's very interesting because people think you have an idea, you build a technology. And this cascade, I call it, from you have a technology and then you see people make a decision to use it. And if enough people use it, then society gets involved saying, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And this is how you should use it. And finally, there's laws, but that's only at the end, and just a few laws. But it's not just building technology. It's building a technology that exists, and suddenly somebody, it doesn't matter who it is, not even a technology, uses it in a way you never suspected. And it happens again. There are this ethical cascade you've got to decide on. And so there's a big bang of these cascades now because one person uses it this way and you built it for something else. So we have a much larger landscape or fabric to think about, I think, as technologists.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And we are now, with AI, especially, every day you hear stories about bias and damaging effects of these technologies. We have built these platforms now, especially the social media platforms and so forth. And they're incredibly powerful and they connect us. But they have some really strong negative side effects and unintended side effects. But that goes into how we design systems. We have built damaging technology before and brought it to good use. I mean, if you look at nuclear power, for example, there is a very strong regime around regulating it and controlling it. And yes, there has been the Chernobyl, there has been the Fukushima, but by and large, nuclear power is used in an incredibly positive way, despite the enormous power that it has to do damage. And we need to start thinking in the same way around, the technological platforms that we are building, the AI technologies and all of these things that we are now inventing, and not have the ethics and the regulations be sort of the final piece of the puzzle, but have those be upfront and get people, as us as inventors, to think through those consequences. We cannot stop the development of these technologies, but we have to learn how to make sure that it is used in the right ways ahead of time.
That reminds me, Alfred, Greg Papadopoulos, its son, once published with a book. I can't remember who he wrote it with. It was another engineer. And it was periodic table. And it looks really familiar, except there was a bunch of X's that says, if you use these elements, you can't recycle this. It's not sustainable. When I went to school so many years ago, we never thought of the sustainability, the recycling. There's much that we can do and also have impact on other engineers and how we build it.
Yeah, Moira, think about it, right? So I think starting today, the air quality in the whole San Francisco, starting with the city first because it's coming from the north and it's heading inland, it's going to be terrible again. So for those of us who have seen, we wake up at 9 o'clock in the morning, you look out the window, it was completely orange and where I was, right? Literally, it looks like apocalypse and the world is ending. It may be coming back again. So to think that is not something that is caused by the environment, that human has done things to cause the environment to do this, it won't be smart to think that, right? So we have done a lot of damage. I mean, we've been digging and extracting these crude oil out of the core of the earth. You just think of it's philosophically, it's just how could it not do damage, that we don't have global warming, and storm and other issues that are affecting the movement, of an orbit itself. But there are always two sides of this equation, right? I mean, I'm personally super excited about things like, for example, now there's so much emphasis around data. So everyone is now so much more analytical in terms of how they're looking at everything, right? So, which is very, like, as an engineer, that's normal. But I think the whole world is now understand we have to use data to judge where we are. I mean, every day we're hearing these stats like how many deaths out of COVID, how many people getting infected, where are they getting infected? Are we going through first wave, second wave, third wave? Those are all extraordinarily crucial data, right? And so it's everything else, right? Like there's a sushi place I love in a city that it's a husband and wife, and while picking up the sushi, and the wife was saying, "Oh, we're actually cooking cooked food this week." I said, "Why?" I said, "I thought this is a sushi restaurant." I said, No. Actually, through Square and also through Google Analytics, I was able to do some analysis, and it said our customers are really wanted some home cooked food now from us. So with social media and other data we've collected, we decided to try this. So I said, really?
And they were cooking what?
Actually, they were making curry. So the
Japanese restaurant was making curry.
That's right. Japanese curry in this case, but they did it because they did an analysis. So I think as we embark on this very data-driven kind of world, you can almost see where it's going to go next, right? Next, we're going to be able to do machine learned analysis on internal medicine. So prescription of medication and our health conditions will be so much better learned by having systematic algorithm than randomly and subjectively just only seen by a doctor and our own gauges. So it's going to help improve the quality of mankind in many different ways. Transportation, right? It's got to be able to help prevent crashes and accidents and all kinds of stuff, because we know so much more about the patterns of how it happens and what do we do to prevent it. So you can just see the aspect of how sciences going into the future can make the world in such a better place and can make the quality of life better. But that comes with responsibility, right? So if we don't put back, right, and contribute back. I understand we have to preserve. So some things that once we take, we can never take back, which is the natural resources that we live on, right? So for thousands of years, we've been taking away from it. So that is our responsibility to know, be better, and to improve on our own to preserve the place, right? I mean, not to do that is really a crime. But these things come together. The more we learn, the more we should be able to protect it, and it should go that way.
That's extreme. That's incredible. One of the things that touched me, what you were saying, Alfred, about how you've obsoleted a number of your breakthrough technologies, and what you were also saying, Vishal, about looking into that sort of that next gap and saying, wait a minute, we can do this, we can do that. It occurs to me that as a baby boomer, as I'm a baby boomer, and so many people, that we have to rethink how the trajectory of our careers, especially now that we can work from home. What are you thinking? What kind of advice or insights might you offer people who are 35, 40, 50, 60, 70, and 80, since that health and your mind and your ability to contribute, things are changing?
No, I think that the ability to see something that is not there is something that all of us have. It is not, we sort of have got accustomed to this idea that innovation is the domain of a chosen few, that somehow there are a few innovators and then there is the rest of us. And I think that idea is nonsense. I think all of us are born with the ability to, so at the heart of it, innovation is nothing else than the art of seeing something that is not there. And then imagining if the world had this thing, it would be better in this way and that way. We are trained by nature to see what is there, but the act of seeing something that is not there, it can be learned. And when people tell me, oh, Vishal, how can there be a billion entrepreneurs? And if you talk to any 4-year-old child, they drive parents crazy with the why questions, why this and why that. We have the curiosity, we are born with it. So I think that it is something that we can all hone, that we can all develop at any age. It doesn't matter. There are ways like design thinking and so forth to go be more systematic about understanding needs and looking at what your target audience's life is like and see what is missing there. What is it that they find painful? What is it they have difficulties with? And coming up with ideas, synthesizing ideas around that. So there are ways that we can be systematic about it. There are ways that we can sort of learn on our own to see things that are not there and that would be beneficial if they were there. And then taking the next step and figuring out ways to make those happen. I think that is something, especially as we think about the future and the age of AI, more and more of things that can be sort of specified, that can be, one of the things that Alfred built in his life was this wonderful platform for enterprise software and the ability to build software, the tooling for building software. More and more with AI, we are reaching a point where things that we can articulate precisely is going to be done automatically. And therefore, the human frontier is imagining what is next, coming up with what is not there that would be desirable and viable if it was there. And I think it behooves all of us to learn that, and we can. So this is, in fact, a very timely thing for the times that we are living in, that we are entering into.
Alfred?
Well, there's, the exciting thing about getting up in the morning is, wow, there's so many problems to be solved, right? And I think people used to think, obviously as time changed, mostly, as you said, the longevity of generally about how long people can live drastically change the horizon of how long do you think you're in the game of still be able to work away, right? Yeah. And I also think the context of work is changing, right? So I'm hoping that people love their work. If you don't love your work, it's a grind, right? So, and hopefully as along the way, you learn, like I've always said, why go to a university? You go to university because university is not a place to tell you and teach you the exact subject matter. I don't think that's really what I get out of it, especially when you go to graduate school. All that experience is about teaching you how to learn. So we learn how to learn, right? So then that's a lifetime gift that now you want to learn. If the interest to learn is there, then the interest in innovation is happening in parallel. There are just some, I mean, like, look. We talked about a few things we touched on that we really know very little about, right? So the way that the whole COVID-19 happened run in such parallel similarity to the 1918 Spanish pandemic, it is scary because everything else will have improved so much. Look at how fast our car can run, right? How fast we have computer. But yet on the sciences of understanding the virus and innovating therapeutics and vaccines, we have not improved that much since 1918, right? And pretty much blow by blow. And people say, well, how do you know this is going to happen? I didn't know. I just read the history of what happened during the Spanish flu, right? And then there's the second wave. And at first it hurt the people that are elderly and they have a long-term illness. Then it gets to the young kids because it become a pulmonary disease that it's now they have very healthy lung. So, but when the disease moves, when the virus moves, it moves very quickly because they have very healthy cell. So that stuff, I mean, we still have a long way to go. And I'm hoping that all the other sciences we have been inventing, including artificial intelligence, machine learning, the ability to be able to collect vast amount of data, hopefully it will dramatically help we be able to deal with things like that. Earlier, we talked about the monkey, right? How the monkey, which is really the closest cousins that we have, and still the only cousins that we have to allow to experiment with to help us to improve sciences. That's going to be so crucial, for us that like our brain, we know so little about our brain. Like, I mean, there's a lot more interest now because now we finally figure out, what's the smartest AI engine we can build? How does the brain really work? But we know so little about how our brain works, right? It's almost like you say, how could this be? So those are the things that I think for us, we still have so much catch up to do. And hopefully we do it smartly. We leverage other technology, which we have, right? So everything is done on a computer now, is to be able to improve even biosciences dramatically. So 100 years from now, we don't look back and say, we learned nothing. So we had the Spanish flu, we have COVID, and now we have another one. That really would be a shame, right? So that's something that we as mankind better improve dramatically this time around and learn if there's a virus of this kind that come from a fowl that goes to a mammal and then it gets to human, we know how to stop it really fast, right? So, yeah.
Well, it's interesting because sometimes it's the simple tools that tell us things we never knew. Our simple genetic decoding tools, which are really max 15 years old, but really pretty fast, 5 to 8 years old. That's when we figured out that the Spanish flu had mutated. We still have it. It never went away.
Yeah.
Which is a lesson for, oh my goodness, this COVID-19 is not going away. It's going to evolve into a number of things, and we have to be really smart about it. But we can only be as smart as the technology we have, from what seems to be simple all the way to very complex and higher level education, higher level analysis that AI and machine learning permit us to do. So let me ask you a really quick question, since I'm in the business of education here. We've covered a lot of territory about what's going to happen. Vishal, your son is a data science major. That didn't exist when we were going to school. You could be an applications programmer, a systems programmer, or be in theoretical computer science, or build some a computer part that now you can't even see. Alfred, your son is in mechanical engineering. We have mechanical engineering at USF. It doesn't look like the mechanical engineering I took. There's a whole lot of what we would call computer science in it. What should people today, and this could be young people or even older people, it could be at the master's level, it could be wherever it is, or people just going into school today, what kind of majors, what things should they study to prepare them for all of this? And I'm gonna have to ask you each just to 30 seconds each because we're coming up on our time now. Vishal.
I would say, of course, there are majors based on where the trajectories of the world are pointed to, in biology, in computer science, data science, engineering, these disciplines. But I want to get back to a point that Alfred made, which is very profound, which is that it is really about learning to learn. What you are acquiring is the skill to learn anything, because over the rest of your life, you will be required to learn hundreds of new kinds of things. And
Yes.
how you learn that is what you learn in the university. And so I think that is an incredibly important thing. And our new School of Engineering is going to be a great place where all this multidisciplinary, design thinking and these ideas will come together.
Absolutely. Alfred, quick
Well,
wrap up there.
Entrepreneurship is not bounded by the type of degree you have.
It's a habit.
These companies that I've seen, the 200 plus company I've seen since March, many of these founders, they have an economics degree, they have a history degree, they have a, like biosciences degree, but they happen to be now switching to do machine learning, data sciences, and anything like that. I think this really is what the person wants to do. If a student comes to me and say, well, I'm in biology, but I'd like to get a job at Google. I said, I don't think it matters. I think, so what kind of job do you want to get? What kind of innovation do you want to be involved in, right? And think what we ended up in life that you wanted to make a difference in. So focus on that. And things that you haven't, you think that you lack of, you don't know. I mean, like now education is so easy to get. It's all available online. Go get that then if you don't have it. Now, you can also self-learn. There's so many tools that we never had before, right? That we could learn all kinds of stuff. So it really comes down to motivation and interest. And by the way, that shows when somebody meets you that will either hire you or want to sponsor you, because that energy is intoxicating. You can feel it. Doesn't matter. This is such a smart person. By the way, I only fund people that are based on people. I don't fund because of what they're actually working on, because it's almost guaranteed the startup's going to get moved around, pivoted around many, many times. Yeah. You find the right people, the rest will be cooking. So I think
take care of itself. Well, Vishal and Alfred, thank you so much. This has been just terrific. I could talk to you for another 3 hours, but now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our president, Father Paul Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Moira. Thank you very much for hosting this amazing conversation between two great friends of the university. Alfred and Vishal, thank you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. I love the story. I have the image of the two of you as 16-year-olds, building your very first programs, your very first computer programs, and just being delighted to let your curiosity run rampant. I really want to underscore how right you are when you talk about the importance of building diverse teams, which are the most creative, the most curious, the most entrepreneurial. I'm so impressed with the culture of innovation that you've been able to build at several companies that you've been able to lead. And I'm so proud of how you underscore the importance of ethics and social justice. I once had the pleasure, when I was a professor at Santa Clara University, of having a guest speaker who had not yet won his Nobel Prize, Muhammad Yunus, the inventor of microcredit. And he made the same point that you made, which is that human persons are by nature entrepreneurial. And they just need that encouragement, and they just need they need the means. And sometimes just a $5 loan was enough to start a company in Bangladesh. I want to thank Alfred and Vishal for being thought partners with folks here at the University of San Francisco. We've long had computer science, more recently data science, but this fall we launched an engineering program, which is all about closing the biggest gap ever measured by human beings, the 14 inches between the heart and the brain. And both of you in your careers and in your life, you've closed that gap. So that, what your mind tells you is possible, your heart also tells you is good and just. So yeah, we launched engineering with twice the national average of women in our first cohort, twice the national average of Latinos, and twice the national average of Black identified students. And, Alfred, we started that conversation 6 years ago. And so, we really want to build a school that's going to graduate engineers. We're going to create this kind of a culture in the world of tech. I'm just so grateful for your presence here today. And I want to thank both of you. You've also been benefactors to the University of San Francisco, helping our students. This is a time of crisis, which is also a time of opportunity. Our trustees have launched a COVID-19 response fund. And this is a fund that allows us to help our students who are particularly impacted by the pandemic. Anything from, they need tech, they need better tech at home so they can do the distance learning. They need to close the gap in their financial aid because mom has been furloughed or dad has lost his job. Some of them need food and shelter. So we're sheltering students here on campus. So just for all of the folks of the USF family who are listening in today, watching today, thank you for joining us. There's much fruit that you should hold with an open hand, not a closed fist, but much fruit to be gained from this great conversation, and for all your support of our students in so many ways. From the bottom of my heart, thank you.
Thank you.
May God bless.
God bless.